there, viewers, and welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at a 2016 Chevrolet Suburban. It's got about $150 on the odometer, and it needs brakes in all four corners. So we're going to break this up into a two-part series, no pun intended, where we're going to take a look at the front brakes first, and then we'll take a look at the rear brakes as well. Now, it's important to realize there are two RPO codes for this vehicle, regular production codes. And you'll find those in the glove box on a sticker that looks like this. And as you can see, that this vehicle has the JD9 brakes, which will affect the torque values that we put onto the torque wrench when we final check everything. So if you see two options for brakes with weird codes next to them, they're definitely distinguished by their RPO codes, not necessarily by the year, the make, the model of the vehicle. It's actually the type of brakes that they put on that specific trim level of vehicle. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. This has aftermarket wheels, so we'll spend a little bit of time taking the center cap loose and then marking which holes the lug studs actually went through, which will save us a little bit of time later. Let's go ahead and find a socket and some tools that fit. So first things first. Nope. 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 Yep. Got to find the right little bolt. They're Allen, and they're 3/16 standard. So I'm assuming the one straight across from it. Now, a lot of these aftermarket wheels have no room for a socket. Okay, so we're at a 19 millimeter, barely fits, really, really tight. I am going to take a paint marker and make a mark on which hole the lugs actually went through. I'm just going to do it on all of them so that I don't have to worry about trying to find it. And that way we don't have to mess around with the weird offsets that this wheel actually has on it. Next, we'll go ahead and remove the wheel. If the lug gets stuck in the socket, just thread it on a little bit and wiggle the socket, and then they'll come out pretty easily. These are like car lugs. Next thing we're going to do is use a T30, and we're going to remove, oh boy, sometimes these come out. We're going to remove this little Torx screw, and all this little screw does is it holds the rotor onto the truck on the assembly line so the rotors don't fall off. Next, what I'm going to do is just break some bolts loose. They shouldn't be extraordinarily tight, but I'm going to take the caliper slide pin bolts loose while the caliper is still on the vehicle so that I don't have to fight with it. Okay, the next one, and these are torqued in like 180 foot-pounds or something, are these bolts for the caliper bracket to the knuckle. So I'm not going to try to wrench on those. We got to get a socket that actually fits. You can see how floppy that is. I'm going to try this by hand. Oh yeah, first try. By the way, that's a ratchet and a pipe. Pretty easy way to avoid the warranty on your tools. Gotta be a little bit careful on the top because there's a brake line in the way. We don't want to damage it. Perfect. Lovely. We'll just spin these out first. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is we're going to finger, because I got finger control over the mounting pin or the slide pin bolts. So I'm just going to go ahead and take those out. I want to do all these bolts loose up before I take everything apart. It just makes my life so much easier. And we should be able to peel the caliper after this. Okay, and then we'll hang the caliper up. Looks like we have steel faces on our piston. which is really nice. We'll just hang the caliper from the coil spring so that it's not hanging by the hose or anything major like that. Perfect. What we can do now is we can pull our pads out. And you see we have the abutment hardware that's actually intact on this. This is nice. And the pad material is the same thickness, if not a little bit thinner, than the material that it's glued to. These linings are bonded. So, well, they have little claws that come out of the backing plate support structure. And these are Wagner's, so somebody's been in this vehicle before and done some replacement, which is fine. It looks like semi-metallic pads, but it's definitely time for new fronts on this for sure. So we can go ahead and pull our fronts, and then on the inside, hopefully this all pops out. The squeaker goes on the inside up. So that way, if the caliper doesn't slide anymore, if it binds up, the inside pad actually will continue to wear. So that's why we want the wear indicator on the inside, if at all possible. Okay. Next up, let's lose the caliper bracket. Be sure to hold on to that bracket, because when you pull the bolt out, they like to fall and land on your feet. Don't ask me how I know about that. Been there, done that before. So here's the caliper bracket. We have to remove that so that we can get the rotor off of the vehicle. We'll set that aside for later. Next comes the rotor. Ooh, nice and rusty. Perfect. We'll clean that up so it looks brand new. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to use this Pro Brake Hub cleaning kit from 3M. Not a sponsor. And that goes on your drill. And you see how nicely that fits around the lug stud. And we go to town with it, and it makes things look really nice. So you wiggle it around and you can see how it really cleans through and cuts through that rust. If you don't do this step, the rotor will not sit flush on the hub. You really only actually have to clean here and down in here. So I'm not going to need to worry too much about this rust here in the middle. But if you actually coat this hub with like Crown or fluid film or 3M's cavity wax, none of this ever happens. So it's too bad they don't do that. At least a lot of people don't seem to do that. I always do. And then you don't have to clean up this mess. I'm actually going with really, really, really light pressure. Next, I'm just going to go after it with some 80 grit sandpaper in between where I can't get the grinder with the lug studs in my way. Next, we'll give it a rinse. See, that already looks 100 times better. Very nice. Next, we're going to spray the hub with a product called fluid film. and it's kind of a natural corrosion inhibitor. We're going to be kind of generous with it. Then we'll put a little anti-seize on the lug nuts, and then we're pretty much going to be done. This looks pretty clean here on this area where the caliper bracket bolts up to the knuckle, so that I don't really have to do any much prep or clean as far as that's concerned. We don't have to put a ton on. Just give it a casual little brushing. And this is going to help keep the lug nuts from seizing on and then the studs from breaking when some poor soul tries to take the wheel off a little bit later on. I always do these brake jobs like I'm going to be the next person that's going to be working on this vehicle, like I'm rotating the tires or I'm going to be doing the next brake job. Because you find if you do a good job on it, customers tend to bring it back to people that they know and trust. So anyway, this is done. Let's go ahead and prep the caliper bracket. What we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and remove this abutment hardware. You're probably going to ruin it getting it off. But your brake pads come with new hardware, and if they don't, you need to make sure that you buy new hardware. This is all stainless steel. Okay, so with that off, what we need to do is we need to grind this area just a little bit. I like to get any rust or any corrosion off of it. Okay, that looks pretty good. We're going to do the exact same thing here on the other side. So if we don't do this, you can see that you get rust buildup behind the abutment hardware. And what will actually happen is the abutment hardware will be pushed out and it will seize the pads in the caliper, and then the pads won't move. So we're going to actually coat all of this with grease to help keep it from rusting at a later date as well. We want to get all that rust off. If you just take sandpaper to it, it doesn't always do a really good job. So I really like to actually grind that rust off. Okay, beautiful. Next, what we're going to do is use some brake caliper grease. And we're just going to put a light coating of grease in that area that we just ground. And this will keep that metal from rusting at a later date and keep everybody happy. We don't put grease, or at least I don't put grease on the front side of the abutment hardware. I put grease on the back side of the abutment hardware where it's never going to touch the pads. With that greased, we'll go ahead and install our new abutment hardware. Usually just presses on. Yep, there we go. You hear that click. There we go. Everything's clean and really nice. Everything fits good. Put our pads in from the outside. A little bit later, of course, we'll put the other piece of abutment hardware in. Our next step is to inspect the caliper slide pins. Pull this seal back and then pull the slide pin out. And you can see there's plenty of grease on this one already. So I'm actually not going to put any additional grease on the slide pin itself. I'm just going to put a little bit of grease up here because that helps keep the water infiltration from happening. If you over grease these, they can actually cause uneven pad wear. So I spin that around, make sure that all the air is burped out and that that's in nice like that. We'll do the same with the other one. You can see this one's nice and full of grease as well. Just going to put a little bit of grease around there on the top. Keep the water out. Push that in, pull it back, burp the air out. Spin it around a little bit. Everybody moves really nice. It's exactly how I want it to be. Okay, it's pad time. So on these brackets, it's actually pretty easy to figure out how to put the pads in. You got curvy that you can see in the back, and you got flatty that you can see in the front. You've got curvy that you can see right here, and you've got flatty. So it's pretty obvious how these are going to go in. We're going to put these in caliper bracket first. I like to do this off of the truck. I just think it's a little bit easier. And by the way, if these don't fit, don't grind the ears down. Buy a different set of pads. They should fit perfectly the first time you try to install them, okay? So that's how that one goes. Make sure the friction side is actually facing the rotor. People somehow can figure out how to put these things in backwards. I don't know how you do that, but I have seen pictures on the internet, and the internet is always right, of people putting the pads in backwards with the metal facing the rotor, and that's just not cool on how you do it. Make sure you don't get any of this grease on the pad material and push the pads all the way back to their stops. This caliper is now ready to be installed onto the vehicle. Now we're going to prep the caliper. So I'm just going to run some sandpaper over this piston face. It actually looks pretty good. Don't do this if these are phenolic. I can tell these are metal, but phenolic is a fancy term for plastic, and you don't need to do this to the pistons that are plastic. I just want to get any corrosion, any chunks, anything that wants to wedge itself between the pad and the piston face cleaned and gone and out of there. I'm also going to do the back sides of, well, the claws, just to get everything looking real good. Okay, perfect. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to press the pistons in. This is a dual piston compressor tool. It's amazing what they make out of a caulking gun. And we'll just go ahead and press those in. We have to be very mindful that this doesn't swell up, this dust boot. This is not actually the seal that holds the brake fluid in. This is a weather seal, and it keeps the piston from corroding up underneath it. You can actually see how that's nice and clean. If this pooches out, that means that it's going to get caught on between the pad and the piston when we put everything back together, and that's going to cause it to be destroyed. That wouldn't be good. So you can kind of see that that's wanting to pooch out a little bit, but I think we're going to be okay. Everything's looking good. Okay, everybody pressed in nice and flush. Go till it stops and release the tool. Next, we're going to chase this with the Permatex. Again, this is a special grease for brake calipers. I believe it's good for up to 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Actually, do not use standard wheel bearing grease. And what this is doing is this is keeping the piston face from rusting at a later date and causing uneven pad wear. And it also really helps cut down on the squealing. I realize you can probably only see my hand, but trust me, we're putting grease on this, and I'm trying to do it with one hand so that you can actually see kind of what's going on here. You kind of got to use your imagination a little bit. Put some grease on the claws so they don't rust. Helps cut down on that squealing as well. Okay, our caliper is officially finished. Time for the brake rotor. So the trend with brake rotors now is to wrap them in anti-corrosive paper. I actually don't see a ton of them come in a plastic bag, but there's an oil on all of these that we have to clean off. And so I just use some brake clean, and you can kind of see it coming off. And we don't want that getting contaminated onto our pad surface, because it's going to cause the brakes, honestly, to not work very well. So let's make sure that we get both sides. Get everybody cleaned up good. And then this is ready to go onto the car. So you got to line up the holes. Oh, first try. Okay, so most of these holes ain't going to be used, but this one here with the threads in it is to actually jack the rotor off the car with a bolt. but we didn't have to do that. These just dropped off real nice and easy. Let's go ahead and install our bolt. The torque on this little bolt is not critical because it doesn't really do anything. That's the wrong fastener. Try that again. It's my first day on the job, apparently. So this torque can be just snug it down. Make sure it bolts up square. Don't have it like tilted or anything stupid like that, because that's not how we want it. And then I just cinch it down a little bit. Doesn't need to be excruciatingly tight. Next, I want to clean up these bolts, get some fresh real estate for the thread locker. Okay. On some manufacturers, you actually have to replace these bolts. So definitely check your service information. I did check on this vehicle, and it does not mention anything except to put thread locker on the bolts. So we're going to put some on about the first third of the bolt. And we'll let that sit for a few minutes. Well, that's about half of a bolt. You get the idea. We're going to put some on there. It helps lubricate the threads and keeps them from rattling out at like 180 foot-pounds. Next, we're going to bring our fully loaded caliper bracket over. We're going to thread in these bolts through the knuckle. We're not going to tighten anything. Wow, that stabbed in first try. And we're going to thread the top one in. Now we can tighten them down. Just till they're snug. Perfect. So I stand corrected. It's 170 foot-pounds. But the nice thing is I can just pull down on this torque wrench. Oh, I thought I could. We'll get it back up into prime torque position. There's that one. Rotate the socket. There's that one. Now we'll bring the caliper up. And everything should just slide together. Push those pins in a little bit. Everything slides in really nice. Thread in these fixing bolts. We're going to have to play around with the positioning a little bit. Okay, I did put just a little tiny bit of Loctite on them. Not a lot, just a little bit. These little guys are 74 foot-pounds for the caliper, to the caliper bracket anyway. Okay, everything is torqued to factory spec. Let's make sure that this caliper can slide a little bit. It sure can. I can see my pads moving. That's exactly what we want. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and spray the back of the wheel with a little bit of fluid film on the part that mates up to the rotor. And that just saves me from spraying it all over the rotor and contaminating my brake pads. Okay, make sure you put that plastic spacer on, which is really cool on these wheels, that there's actually a hub centering device on that. It really helps keep it from just centering up solely on the lug nuts. We'll go ahead and start our lugs by hand. Next, we let the truck down and we put 140 foot-pounds on these lugs. So I'm going to do kind of a progressive tightening. I'm not going to tighten one down all the way. Okay. So our next step is to install a center cap. Okay. So our next step is going to be to install one center cap bolt along with the center cap. I did put a little bit of blue Loctite on these because I don't want to tighten them down super tight and crack the plastic cap. I also don't want to be the guy that causes her to lose the center cap, because after a couple of years, these are hard to find. They discontinue these wheels and then you can't find center caps, you can't find replacements, and it kind of becomes just a bit of a challenge. So there we go. Well, there you got it, folks. That is how you do a brake job, front brake job, on your 2016 Chevy Suburban. So hopefully you liked what we did here today. As always, thanks for watching and good luck on your brake job. And before we go, don't forget to pump up that brake pedal and check the fluid level in the master cylinder.